All right, well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for agreeing to sit in with me this morning. So we've been just, a few of us have been chatting, and we know that life is crazy and busy right now, and we've just been talking about the unpredictability. And what I'm going to share with you this morning, and I'll break out a PowerPoint in a minute, is if for those of you who have been through any training with myself and Lori, there's going to be pieces of this you have heard a little bit of. This is going to expand on some of those concepts that maybe we've talked about in some of our other trainings. A few years ago, I had this opportunity to do this year-long training in a modality called Conversational Intelligence. And I've been doing work in the helping professions for almost 40 years. And this was a truly transformational experience for me going through this training in how it challenged my thinking about one of the parts of the work we do that I think for many of us, we take somewhat for granted because we're intuitively good at it. And that's the part of our work where the moment we sit down with another human being, what is going on between us and that other human being that creates a sense of trust and safety and inclusion, or the opposite of not safe, not trust. Now, some of you I know have heard me say this before. For all of you on the call this morning, I know a few of you, I don't know many of you. I make this assumption about every single one of you simply because you have chosen the profession you have chosen. And my assumption is that from your first breath as a human being, that you are inherently a caring, compassionate, empathic, committed, dedicated, wants to make the world a better place person. That is inherent to who you are, always has been, and it's probably a whole lot of what drew you to choose to do the kind of work that you do. And I think for many of us, and I know myself included, for many, many years, I just assumed, because that's inherently who I am, I just assumed if I have those inherent skills, I'm good in terms of connecting with other human beings. And what this training experience highlighted for me is that all of those inherent ways of being that I just mentioned are prerequisites to doing really good work, and they're possibly not sufficient. And that now we can be guided by some of the latest and greatest in the research world, in the evidence-based world, of exactly how to engage with someone through the transaction of conversation that immediately attends to trust, safety, and inclusion needs, or doesn't. And so I've cobbled that together with just a bunch of other experiences and things I think about. A little bit of what you're going to get over the next few minutes is the world according to Keith Greer, in how to do an effective helping conversation. What is this thing we do when we sit down with another human being and we are in the seat of being asked to help? How can we be guided by some of what we understand comes to us from the world of research, whether it's neuroscience or behavioral research or the science of change? How can we use that to ensure that we are conducting the most effective helping conversation? So I want to give you a really quick example of trust, safety, and inclusion, or the opposite of. And I'll use an example I often use because it seems to resonate with people. So I want you to think about somewhere in your work experience, being invited into a conference room with your team, and the head of your team was up at the front of the room talking passionately and excitedly about some new initiative, some new direction the organization is going to go in. We're all in this together. There'll be new opportunity for all of you. This is a really great thing. And around the room, there was a buzz and people were kind of into it. And yeah, that sounds really great. And the meeting ends. And then what has been people's experience in the days following that meeting? Well, for many people, the experience is all of those smaller meetings after the meeting. And the tenor of the conversation in the meetings after the meeting is rarely as excited as it was in the first meeting. Because usually in the meetings after the meeting is when in small groups, duos or small groups, man, what are they talking about? We can't take on another thing. I'm already feeling overwhelmed. Nobody asked me what I thought. Who got to make that decision? Now, I've had that experience. Most people have. And so for me, I get really curious, what's the explanation for that phenomenon? And one of the explanations is, in that original meeting, nobody took the time to attend to trust, safety, and inclusion. Were there the required amounts of those concepts in the room so that people could be authentic, could be transparent, could be genuine, could be themselves, could disagree, could ask questions? And so from an organizational standpoint, where that leaves me is that means however many minutes were eaten up in that first meeting were an absolute waste of time. There was nothing productive that came out of that meeting. And the evidence of the lack of productivity is all of those meetings after the meeting. I want to help people figure out and to think about, ask people to think about what would need to happen in that first meeting. Or maybe for folks who do some of the work that we do, the minute I walk into the waiting room and meet a client for the first time, what are some ways of thinking that can guide me from the evidence-based world in how to create trust, safety, and inclusion? So that is what we're going to get into today. And if all goes well, I am going to call up the PowerPoint and get back to you guys. And let me share my screen. And I am hoping everybody can see that. I should say Neurochemistry of Trust. I see people shaking their head. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, over the next few minutes, buzz through some information. We'll probably have some time for questions. There's a book I'm going to recommend that I think anyone who does helping conversations would find really a worthwhile read. And I'm going to talk about this from both the standpoint of an organization, as well as maybe how this is relevant to us as individuals who facilitate helping conversations. So why focus on trust? Well, from an organizational standpoint, before we even get to how it impacts the work we do as individuals, from an organizational standpoint, there's some pretty interesting research out there around what happens in high trust companies. And some of the people who do some of that research, like this gentleman, Paul Zak, they have a variety of different ways that they measure high trust. Some ways, some of the metrics they use are more behavioral. But as I'm going to get into in a few minutes, we can also measure neurochemical activity to look for certain neurochemicals that are evidence of, oh, I feel trusting and safe, or evidence of I don't. And so when they do this research, they're looking not only at in the behavioral world, but they're actually doing, this gentleman actually does blood draws on people to measure some of that activity. So, here's just some of the statistics. We know if you work in a high trust organization, there's good stuff that's going on for the organization as a whole and for each individual in that organization. Has a major impact on employee loyalty. And boy, in the helping professions, that's pretty important because our work is pretty tough. I better really like where I work and feel good about where I work. So 50% more of those working in high trust organizations plan to stay. 88% said they'd recommend the company, which is probably one of the highest or most powerful statistics you can look for of, do people really like working here? Like, they'd invite other people in their life to come and work. So again, here, from an organizational standpoint, the importance of attending to trust is incredibly important. This comes from the Cigna Insurance Company. They did some research around loneliness, and not surprising in our country, and even more so now. In 2018, there was a 13% rise in loneliness. The interesting part to me is that the highest levels of feelings of loneliness were our youngest population of workers, the Gen Z population. I'm thinking that has increased dramatically with the advent of COVID-19, and that's going to come back, is presently in the workplace, and is going to continue to come back into the workplace as hopefully we're even invited to come back physically. All right, so what do we know for organizations that what some of the challenges they're going to have as a result of COVID-19? Well, presently, and again, moving forward, their employees are dealing with all of this. This is being perceived by many of us as a trauma, at the very least, loss. We were having a conversation when we first came on about the loss of rituals, graduation rituals, things like that for people. And so as an organization, if we're just looking at this from the standpoint of leadership within an organization, this is going to need to be attended to. And to attend to this really, really shines a light on, have we created within our organization trust, safety, and inclusion that will allow people to be vulnerable enough to talk about some of this as they come back into the workplace, because it's there. It's going to be there whether we talk about it or not. We know that people with good coworker relationships were less lonely from that same Cigna research. So what is going on to foster those relationships? And we know, again, at the end of the day, that increased trust, it just results in good stuff, happiness, energy. The bullet point, I think, for an organization that's important is innovation, that this is what empowers our employees to grow and to step outside of their comfort zone and to attempt to do some new things. So this I thought was really interesting. This comes from Price Waterhouse, and it was a survey they did in 2016 that reported that 55% of CEOs think that a lack of trust is a threat to their organizational growth. And yet, most of them have done nothing to address that because they're just not sure what to do. So, we can all agree that this concept of trust is important, but to get to the point where we can operationalize it and figure out, well, okay, so exactly what steps could we take to increase it and then measure that, that's a real challenge. And so very often leadership in an organization looks around and can say, yeah, I know the trust levels aren't where we would like them to be, but we're not 100% sure how to address that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So this comes from a woman by the name of Judith Glaser. Judith is the founder and creator of this modality called Conversational Intelligence. Sadly, about a year ago, she passed away after battling cancer. But I love this quote, because organizations love talking about culture. So to get to the next level of greatness depends on the quality of culture, which then depends on the quality of relationships, which then depends on the quality of conversations. Everything happens through conversations. So one of the things that conversational intelligence now allows us to do is to actually deconstruct conversation. What exactly is going on in conversation between two people that engenders trust, safety, and inclusion, or the opposite? And we all know what happens when we do not feel safe and do not feel trust. We jump right into fight, flight, freeze, appease. And so we can measure that and evaluate that now and help folks figure out, what aspects of my conversation could I work on that increases the chance I'm going to engender trust and safety with other folks. So let's jump into neuroscience a little bit. And I know enough neuroscience to get me in trouble. So the little bit I know, I'm going to share with you. So we know there's all these different parts of the brain that have a whole lot to do with how we determine safe, not safe, or trust, distrust, that store different aspects of our memories and our experiences. We are to the point now where we can break down the actual neurochemistry. What is going on neurochemically in our brain when we feel trust? So if you think about an interaction with someone in your life where you feel great trust, total safety, you can be yourself, be authentic. If in that moment that you were engaging in that conversation with that person, we could do a blood draw. Here is the neurochemical mix that we would find in your blood. And the big one is oxytocin. So oxytocin for years has been connected with childbirth. It's the neurochemical that courses through the body of a mom right after she gives birth and allows her to bond with her baby. We now know more. We know that the role of oxytocin is greater than that. It has everything to do with bonding with anybody. It has everything to do with that sense of safety and trust with other human beings. Sometimes I make a joke that oxytocin is the neurochemical that allows women to go through the rigors of childbirth and very quickly say, oh, I think I'll do that again. So it probably has a whole lot to do with why we're even still around as a human species. But what's interesting about this is last year I was reading an article about some research going on in the UK, and you all will relate to this as folks who work with substance use disorder. The research, which was still very much on the rat phase, was looking at if they could figure out how to jumpstart the production of oxytocin in a person's brain, could that become a treatment for substance use disorder? One of the ways that we help people start to address that disconnection and alienation from other people. So this is a neurochemical that we're really trying to upregulate, help create in people, because it means that the interaction going on between us is trusting and safe. And then the flip side is, think about those conversations you're in where you feel distrust, not safe, on the defensive. So again, if we could do a blood draw then, here's the mixture that we would see in your blood. And the big one is cortisol. And cortisol, when it is in a high level in your blood, it closes down your prefrontal cortex. And just hold on to that thought, because we're going to get to it in a minute, of the impact of that happening. All right, so here's something, again, you are working at your organization, you walk out into the waiting room to meet somebody for the first time. You and they start to make judgments about safety and trust in 0.07 seconds. That's how quick this process starts to happen for us as human beings. This is where we need to, and I know all of us have been schooled in fight, flight, freeze, appease, but this is where we really need to stop and thoroughly appreciate that process for us human beings and where it comes from. So fight, flight, freeze, appease came about a bazillion years ago when our primary worry was, if I leave my home, I'm going to be eaten by an animal larger than I. Now, none of us worry about that anymore when we leave our home, but our brain does not know that it is the year 2020. And so its neurochemical reaction to perceived threat is exactly the same as it was when the perceived threat was, I'm going to be eaten. Except now our brain scans our relational world and our emotional world multiple times a second, looking for threat. And the minute it perceives threat, fight, flight, freeze, appease. And now we're going to talk about what happens when we go there. All right, so some people call it, an amygdala hijack. It just takes over. Our fear is high, adrenaline is high. When adrenaline is high, it modulates or stops the production of oxytocin. And if you think about it from a survival standpoint, this makes total sense. I perceive threat. It's not a moment in my life where I want to be thinking about cuddling with other people. It's a moment in my life where my brain is telling me I am at risk and I will do anything I need to do to keep myself safe. Thus, fight, flight, freeze, appease. All right, now let's jump to the front part of our brain, the newer part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. As I read through this, I want you to think about the importance of all of these capacities, not only in functioning in a relationship, but for the work you do with the clients you work with. The importance of these capacities for people who are working on their recovery, who are setting goals, who are trying to move their lives forward. These capacities are crucially important. So prefrontal cortex, hardwired for the higher level coordination of the whole brain. It provides us mastery over higher functions, the ability to see the future, empathy, to step into other people's shoes, to make judgments in the middle of difficult situations. This series of 7 capacities, the acronym is WISE FIT: wisdom, integrity, strategies, empathy, compassion, foresight, insight, and trust. Prefrontal cortex holds our most advanced capabilities: judging, dreaming, envisioning possibilities, aspirations, you name it, all right? A pretty important group of human capacities to connect with other people and to problem solve through difficult times in our lives, or to just grow as an individual or an organization. So here's the challenge. When we are in fight, flight, freeze, appease, the prefrontal cortex is closed tight. Got a couple of locks on it. We have no access whatsoever to all of those capacities. And so if we don't attend to trust, safety, and inclusion immediately, we're tying people's hands behind their back. If part of our conversation with them is some kind of growth-oriented conversation or moving forward, or that conversation I started with where your team, the head of your team is talking about, oh, we're going to do all this great stuff. Well, to do that great stuff as an individual, as an organization, every person needs access to all of those capacities. And they don't have them if they do not perceive trust and safety, and they are in any version of fight, flight, freeze, appease. They might think they do, they might sound like they do, but they don't. All right, now here's part 2 of that. So we're in fight, flight, freeze, appease. Cortisol and adrenaline are high, oxytocin is low, no access to all of those really cool capacities. What do we have access to when we're in fight, flight, freeze, appease? Well, we have access to what we know. So when I'm not safe and not trust, I will just dig into what I think is right. And what that has created is something we now call our addiction to being right. And all we have to do is look around our society right now to see a ton of evidence of this. Of people just saying, I'm right, you're wrong, end of discussion. And it might look like everybody's opinionated, but what it really is telling us is people are not feeling safe, not feeling trusted, not feeling included. And so here's where I go. It's the only place I can go is to what I know. And I'm going to hold on to that with a righteousness and a rigidness that says, I'm right, you're wrong. And oh, by the way, here's what also then goes on neurochemically. When I am hunkered down in my addiction of being right, my brain gives me a little shot of dopamine. It feels good. And it definitely feels better than digging into, I don't feel trust and I don't feel safe. And so it just becomes reinforced to stay there. And we probably have all been in those conversations. We have probably all been that person somewhere where we get stuck in our addiction of being right. But being right is very subjective. So it is a moment where we get to ask ourselves when we feel that righteousness, maybe as a human being, is this a sign that there's something going on around me where I do not feel safe, I do not feel trusted, and I do not feel included? This is the book that I would recommend to all of you. It's Judith's book. It's phenomenal. There's a lot of neuroscience in it, but it's a very accessible read, and just digs in to what we understand is going on in people's brains and how to take a look at, again, this transaction of conversation. So conversational intelligence looks at how do we help people move conversations from simply transactional, low trust or no trust, I'm really not open to what you think, it's just maybe an information exchange at best, to positional, where some growing level of trust. I may be open a little bit to hearing what you have to say, but I don't know in the end, to where we want to get to, which is conversations that are transformational, high trust, exchange of energy. We are open to, some people call it co-influence or co-creation, that when back to that meeting where the team comes in, how do we set things up so that everyone in that room is invited to freely and safely share their thoughts, their feelings, their perspectives, their worries, their concerns. And we trust that at the end of the day, what we create together is going to be much greater than what any individual can create. But that requires significant levels of trust and safety. So what I want to talk about right now really quickly is a couple of conversational blind spots as we begin to deconstruct conversation to look at how to create trust, safety, and inclusion. So blind spot number 1, assuming everyone thinks like me. I get stuck in that because the only head I'm in my entire life is mine. So it's really easy to just assume the whole world sees the world through my eyes, but we know that's not true. And the danger of that is this addiction of being right, this addiction of being my way or the highway. Blind spot 2, feelings don't change my reality. Well, yes, they do. We now know that from the neurochemistry. When I am in fear and distrust, it changes how I see the world. When I'm in a place of trust and safety, it changes how I see the world. It changes what parts of my brain I have access to bring to the fore in whatever I'm being asked to do. Blind spot 3, I can empathize with others when I'm in fear. No, you can't. When we are in fear, fight, flight, freeze, appease sticks in. There's nothing going on that allows us to be connected to other human beings. And we need to understand, again, the origin of that. It's just, I perceive threat, and I need to make sure that I'm safe. I am not thinking about other people's needs or feelings or perspectives at that moment. I remember, therefore I know. So this, I found this interesting because I consider myself a pretty good listener, a professional listener, as are all of you. We drop out of conversations every 12 to 18 seconds to process what we just heard. That's just a neurological fact, that we'll hear some, and then our brain has to do something with it. So it puts it even more of an onus on our need to really, really work hard on how we listen. And the other part of this is we often think we remember, right? We remember what we were told. But what we know is neurochemically, our feeling memory is stronger than our cognitive memory. So we often remember what we felt about what the person said, not the facts of what they said. And so there's another place where meaning can get lost because we're not remembering the details. We're just remembering, did I like or not like? Was I comfortable or uncomfortable with what was said to me? And blind spot number 5, I am listening, so I actually know what you mean. Meaning always resides in the listener, not in the speaker. And so some of what's behind how to do a really good helping conversation is understanding that both of us in the conversation have an obligation to check in with the other one about, do you hear what I'm saying? Or tell me what you think I'm saying. That we know what the meaning is when it leaves our mouth, but when it lands on somebody else's ears, the meaning can be radically different, and we need to check in with that on a pretty regular basis. All right, so here's a couple of false workplace narratives that I just find myself always thinking about in my work with organizations. So the first one is, that's been around forever, employees are to leave their personal problems at the door. I don't know about any of you, but I was, quote, raised professionally that was an inherent message. Leave it at the door, right? We're not responsible for that. And it's a narrative that's never been true because it's not possible. We don't work that way as human beings. Just as we don't work that way in the opposite. We, leave your worries about work at work before you get home. We don't work like that. About a year ago, there's a gentleman that is one of my clients who's a manager at an area company, and he called me from the parking lot. He was sitting in his car in the parking lot at his office in a bit of a panic attack because he just found out that his wife was leaving him. And part of what was making that moment worse for him was, Keith, I shouldn't be letting this affect me at work. Well, good luck with that. So from an organizational standpoint, this is one of those this is a narrative we can get curious about. Is there anything going on here that leads our people to believe this? Or as individuals, do you hold on to this narrative? Has this been taught to you, again, taught quotes around it, somewhere in your professional upbringing that this is supposed to happen? Because it just doesn't work. And the other narrative that I always find myself interested in is the rules that govern workplace relationships are somehow different than the rules that govern personal relationships. I just haven't found that to be true. Relationships are relationships. And the rules that govern effective relationships, the rules that govern the creation of trust and safety are exactly the same in every single relationship. Now, that being said, I do not minimize in the workplace issues like hierarchy and power. I get it. I get that's all there. But at the end of the day, we need to stop somehow seeing the relationships at work as fundamentally different or working on some different rules than the relationships in our personal life, because there just isn't a whole lot of evidence that I see that would support that. So let's talk about some strategies and skills that you can use organizationally and individually to build trust and safety. So the first one, and again, if some of you have been to any training with Lori and I, you've done this, is the creation of a trust and safety working agreement. So I want to go back to that example I gave you of you're all brought into the room by the head of your team. What would happen if before any other conversation took place, somebody got up at the front of the room with a flip chart and ask some questions. All right, gang, so we're going to be together. We're going to do some work. We have a new initiative. If trust, safety, and inclusion were in the room, what would be the evidence that it's there? What do each of you need from the room, from each other, to get to a place where you could be authentic and true and honest, be able to disagree, have conflict? What would trust and safety and inclusion feel like, sound like, look like? Now, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen the first time you ask these questions. People are going to look at you like you have two heads, because nobody has ever been asked these questions before. What we're essentially challenging people to do is to operationalize, to put in concrete terms these concepts that are fuzzy. So when we start thinking about things like, because here's what I will often hear is, well, I need respect in the room. All right, no one in the room is going to disagree with that when it first is said. Of course, we need this room to be respectful. But here's what I know. If there's 10 people in the room, there's 10 different concepts of what respect would look like, sound like, and feel like. 10 different ideas. And same for any of these words: understanding, sensitivity. There needs to be acceptance in the room. Us helping people love throwing terms like this around, and we know what we mean, but we then assume everybody in the room shares that same meaning. So one of the things that we do is, we've stolen a concept from the tech world, is we ask people to double click on these words. So I might ask the person, if someone says, Keith, I need respect in the room. Hey, can we double click on respect? And just as on our computer, when you double click on a link and it opens it up and it takes it deeper, same concept here. All right, person who just said respect, tell me, for you specifically, if respect was in the room in the way you needed it to be, what would it sound like, feel like, look like? What would the evidence be? Well, if respect was in the room, the evidence would be everybody would listen, or one person speaking at a time. Or if respect was in the room, I would feel accepted. And so it's another place where I can get a little obnoxious about this, where I might say, awesome, can we double click on the word acceptance? If acceptance was in the room, what would the evidence be? And what I have found when I do this, and I do this with groups, and I do this with individual clients when I first meet people in my coaching business, we have this conversation. And what I have found is that what gets put on the flip chart, while very important, what is of equal importance is just having the conversation. Of equal importance is highlighting how important trust, safety, and inclusion is for any subsequent conversation to move forward in any kind of productive way. And so if we don't attend to this first, we're going to miss something. And even for us inherently caring, compassionate, loving, helping people, we use these terms, and we use these terms based on our perception of them. And this is just a way to check in with everybody else about how they see trust, safety, and inclusion. So the helping conversation, if you use that term, most people immediately think of people like us. The helping conversation is the domain of counseling and social work and substance use disorder treatment and recovery and things like that. I have found myself thinking way beyond that. That if we define, and this is my definition, if we define a helping conversation as any conversation that focuses on supporting a person in the moment and or supporting the overall growth and development of a person, group, or organization, that immediately expands who facilitates a helping conversation. Every business leader, organizational leader, team leader, faith community leader, everyone is facilitating. Parent, especially parent, is facilitating essentially a helping conversation per this definition. And so the kinds of concepts and strategies we're talking about are wholly relevant above and beyond those of us who spend our days in some of the more traditional corners of the helping world. So this is an acronym from the CIQ world of what we do to create and maintain trust. And it looks at it from the standpoint of the organization or the team and the individual. So what are we doing in conversation to model and honor these 5 concepts of transparency, relationship, understanding, shared success, truth telling, right? Transparency, am I being upfront? Am I putting issues on the table, whether it's for my team or for me as an individual? Am I open and transparent during conversations? To what extent for a relationship, for the team, is my team open to just even having difficult conversations? So it really asks us to explore maybe any of our conflict avoidance-ishness in ourselves. How do I show concerns for other people's needs? Am I really checking in on other people's perspectives, truly, and authentically and sincerely checking in? And how often do I do that to really expand my understanding of other people? Shared success. How much do my leadership team focus on creating mutual success rather than their own? Co-creation, right? For the individual, how often do I take in other people's opinions and really honor them? And truth telling. How often do I say what's on my mind, honestly? Or if I'm an individual and I feel like there's some gaps there or misunderstanding, am I courageous enough to check in with that? One of the things I just want to highlight here is, for all of us as individuals, but this is very much relevant to organizational leaders around relationship and transparency. I was having a conversation a few weeks ago with another client of mine who's an upper administrator in an area human service agency. And she was talking about, as they're dealing with the challenges of COVID-19 for their staff and for their clients, that she sometimes finds herself, she gets very stuck in feeling that as an upper level manager, I can't show vulnerability. I have to show that I'm in control. People are looking to me for that. And we had this really great conversation about it, and I shared a snippet of an article with her that there's some research out there that says, that there does seem to be evidence that when, as a leader, an organizational leader, I show vulnerability, I don't know, I'm feeling overwhelmed, this is difficult for me. The show of vulnerability produces oxytocin in the brain of the people on your team. It actually helps them feel connected to you. And it is not perceived as weakness, right, or not knowing. So another way to create that trust from a leadership standpoint is to maybe challenge some of the longly held beliefs that are finally being shot down about what it means to be a leader and what the people that we lead are looking for from us, especially around trust and safety. So here's something else we can do now. We can, as I said, look at very specific aspects of conversation and determine, do they produce oxytocin or do they produce more cortisol? So here are just a few of the kinds of conversational patterns and ways of being that we know when you engage in these with another human being, it produces oxytocin for both of you. To show concern, to speak your truth, to be open, curious, really, truly invested in mutual success, and a willingness to have the difficult conversations. We can help people build more of these kinds of behaviors and ways of being into their conversational patterns. And the flip side is, what are some conversational patterns that actually produce cortisol, down-regulate the production of oxytocin? So do nothing for trust and safety, questioning other people's intentions, that addiction of being right. We all know this when your words don't align with your nonverbal, right? You'll look like you're listening, but you're not, right? Or listening is impacted by strong feelings. So some last pieces I'll just share that I found to be very helpful in thinking about how to do a trusting and safe helping conversation. It's just the concept of listening to connect. I don't know about any of you, but one of those inherent pieces of me that drew me to this field is I have a very strong fix-it gene. I like to fix things. And yet we know part of doing a really effective helping conversation is, as it says there on kind of bullet 2, is to treat people as a resource, right? To not jump into trying to fix. Keith, can we go back one slide for a minute? Yeah, Brian, I will do that in a second, bud. Yep, got it. So part of doing a helping conversation when you first sit down is how to listen to connect, not listen to fix, right? Not listen to problem solve, not listen to goal set. And so one of the other advantages of that trust and safety working agreement is even that's part of how do I listen to just connect with you. And so as helping people, I will challenge you in doing that to even keep an eye out for the minute you start asking questions, you might be in problem solving mode and you're no longer listening to connect. So how do you maybe use a few more reflections at first? Not worry about getting to some goal setting by the end of the session, but just the creation of trust and safety. A piece of that, as I said, is do you believe that people are their best resource? People have their answers, and that our job is to listen deeply, be patient, help them identify those strengths and capacities, but they have their answers. And Brian, let me do this because I know you asked me to do it. So I know you probably wanted to see those. So we'll go back to those for a second. And you know what, guys? I will make sure that I get this PowerPoint, the notes, to Jackie. So she'll be able to share all of this with you. So you probably, some of you are probably annoyed at me if you've already been furiously taking notes. I see you shaking your head, Emily. I apologize for that. But I will get everybody the notes, the PowerPoint notes. All right, so another way around the helping conversation is employing key concepts from change science. What do we know? So here's some things we know. We know about the role of ambivalence, right? This is something that, and it's so relevant in the world of substance use disorder because we've historically called ambivalence denial and resistance. And it's neither of those. It's ambivalence. And ambivalence, I want to, I don't want to, I want to, I don't want to, is a normal part of the change process for us human beings. Right? It's not something that is unknown. We should expect it. We should celebrate it, and we can work with it. That it's just what people do when they're faced with change. I don't know about any of you, but I suck at change. It's hard. And the bigger the change, the harder it is. So how can we bring that understanding of the role of ambivalence versus someone's being resistant? And the theory of psychological reactance, and again, if some of you have been in training with Laurie and I, you've heard us talk about this. This is a well-researched, accepted theory in the psychological world. I invite you to go and Google it. So those of you who, I know you're looking at the PowerPoint, you're not looking at me. So the best way I can describe this is what the theory of psychological reactance says is when a human being is told what to do, no matter how well-meaning the person who's telling them what to do is, when a human being is told what to do, the instantaneous reaction in their brain is a neurochemical middle finger. Don't tell me what to do. Even when somebody says, please tell me what to do, there is some belief that that process still goes on. And so in our helping conversation, if this is true, and this is, again, this is a theory that's been researched over about 25 years, then it's another piece of evidence about us needing to monitor our fix-it gene. That this is not about telling people what to do. This is about listening to connect, seeing them as their best resource, understanding the ambivalence of change, and helping them identify their motivational spots, what they're ready to do. Use of open-ended questions and reflections. For those of you who've done any motivational interviewing training, there's this really cool ratio out there that they talk about. Sometimes I've read it as 3-to-1, sometimes I've read it as 5-to-1. But it's the ratio of reflections to questions. And this is so true in this first moment of listening to connect. That please attempt to do 5 reflections for every question. Because there is a chance that a question, again, there's just a risk that even the best open-ended question, are we starting to move quickly to problem solving? And without taking a moment to really making sure we have connected, really connected, that we're growing that level of trust and safety. And that is done much, much more powerfully through really good reflections than through, again, even the best of the open-ended questions. This next one I love, ask questions for which you have no answer. Here's one of the things that happens in conversation. I can be at the front of the room, maybe, or I'm in a conversation with you, and I'm asking you questions. It looks like I'm really interested in what you have to say. But behind my questions is my addiction of being right. And so my questions are attempting to move you towards how I see things. So if I'm doing that, I'm asking questions for which I know what the answers are, or at least what I want the answer to be. So one of the ways to truly be in a place of connection, creating connection, trust, and safety, is to ask questions for which I have no answers. I don't know. I'm truly interested in you. I'm truly trying to learn about who you are, your perceptions, the meaning you draw from what's going on here. There's no agenda about trying to move this in the direction I would like to move it. And then the last one, and this is not always easy to measure, is the authenticity of the helper. Right? That this is where, when I call a part of the title of this webinar is the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation. This is the art part of what you bring that is unique to you to doing this conversation. Because one of the other things we know in the trust and safety world is in that 0.07 seconds when I'm starting to perceive whether I trust you or not, that a big piece of this is, do I perceive you as real and authentic and genuine and consistent, so that very quickly and then over time, I can come to trust that the person I was in the conversation with today will be the person I'm in the conversation with tomorrow. And this isn't about your skill necessarily as a helping person, or your knowledge base around being a peer or a clinician, or someone who works with substance use disorder. This is you. This is the you part that will look a bit different from how I do it, to how you do it, to how your colleagues do it, because it's the part of us that we bring to this practice of helping other folks. All right, so that's it. So I'm gonna take this down and just see if there are any questions, thoughts, agreements, disagreements. Again, as I said, you got the helping world according to Keith Greer, so it's what makes sense to me. But would love to hear other people's thoughts. So let me stop this. So yeah, there we go.
Keith, this is Jackie.
Yeah.
I actually own that book, and it is awesome.
Awesome.
I have not read through the whole thing yet because it's so rich.
Yeah.
You've got to read through it and then do some digesting.
Yeah, very much.
But I really do appreciate all of what you said with this. I'm privately chatting some of my staff here saying, is all this sounding familiar? Because you're reiterating some of the things we've been talking about already.
Awesome.
And it really is it's so important to be able to make sure we have that trusting relationship at all levels. So I really appreciated this.
Great, thank you. I always love when that maybe at the end of this, it confirms that you're doing what you're doing, and that's music to my ears. I appreciate that. Any other thoughts, questions, comments?
Yeah, Keith, I just want to thank you for hosting this and taking us through it. I've been through a number of trainings with you, but what I love about this topic and the motivational interviewing and just the helping conversation in general is exactly what you talked about in terms of it's not so limited to, being a clinician or
right.
being a social worker. It literally translates across the board in my life. And I love that. And I love that you bring that up because it happens in conversations with family members.
Yeah.
With, my niece and nephew who we're working on feelings right
right.
now,
right.
So it just transcends all of it. So thank you again for coming in and helping to reinforce in my brain to what this looks like, what it can look like, and how it can grow.
Yeah, thank you. That is some of what attracted me to this when I started to do this work. Is every single one of us as a human being exists in a relationship somewhere. So this isn't just about work. This isn't just about work with our clients. A week ago, I did this webinar for another organization, and as we were doing a little Q&A afterwards, and it's a human service organization, and one of their folks piped up and said, So when you put up that slide about the conversational patterns that produce cortisol, now I know why my teenager won't talk to me. And I just thought that was the best, right? Because everything all of this stuff, and I always say this, everything I just shared, or anytime, we do any training about how to be coach-like, the concepts are so relevant to our role as a parent or a family member, but they're harder to act on because of the level of love and connection we feel for this person. But it was just a wonderful, wonderful moment for her to feel the level of enough trust to share that I got to go home and I've got to start being different with my kid because I'm realizing it's me. And that's the other piece of this, Leah, that I love is this is a modality and it's a way of thinking that is all about if you want things different in your conversations, you have to make it happen. So I've had organizational leaders that I've talked to who've said, wow, Keith, this is really cool. Can you come in and teach this to my organization? But it was very clear that they were not going to be in the room. And that's led to some very interesting conversations about that's not going to work. Right? It's just not going to work. This isn't something you teach people and they do it and you don't have to worry about it. So I have found it wholly relevant. And the last thing I'll say about that, and I always feel funny saying this, but one of the most powerful outcomes of doing this and digging into this is I am much more in touch with when I don't trust. So people have sometimes asked, has this made you more trusting? Actually, no. It's almost made me the opposite. It's just made me aware of when I'm in those conversations and I give myself permission to say, oh, I don't feel the required level of trust, safety, and inclusion here, and that's going to impact, my interaction. What needs to happen? So yeah, relevant all over the place. Any other thoughts?
I was just going to shout out, sorry. I want to shout out the working agreement. It is such a cool, subtle thing. I had, there's a client of mine who has made immense growth, wouldn't leave the house, not safe, not trusting anything. And I remember going through your training and recognizing that the idea of establishing a working agreement from the beginning, totally within that hour and a half in our first visit that I was there, totally transformed from the moment I walked into that door through the moment I walked out.
Right.
And a big part of that was a direct result of having that conversation about the working agreement.
Yeah. A year ago, I had this at the time. In the moment, it was a pretty angst-filled experience. An organization I do some coaching and training for asked me to do some work with their custodial staff. So this is a group of about 15 guys, about as blue collar as you can get. And the organization is going through some changes, and those changes were going to impact this group. And so the leader of that group asked if I would come in and do some work with them and just helping them figure out how they want to move forward given the changes in the larger organization. So look, you walk in the room with that kind of group and you see their look the moment someone like me walks in. I'm one of those touchy-feely fill in the blank. And then I jump into this working agreement thing about trust and safety, and they thought I was the craziest dude in the world. And yet, in about 15 minutes, we hammered out a really good working agreement, because once you start talking about it, and I might give an example like the one I gave you of, being in a room and there's not enough trust and safety. And I'll talk pretty directly that if we don't address this, everything we're about to do is going to be a waste of time. And even with that kind of group, we were able to hammer out something really meaningful that was up on the wall in every meeting we had, and played a role in creating some difference in how they interacted with each other. So that strategy alone is pretty powerful.
I think, Keith, part of that too, especially for leaders, like official leaders on the phone, but even for everybody, as part of that is, again, your action has to follow what you're saying. So
No question.
as an organization, if we're saying we're going to allow you to speak freely and build that trust, and we're putting that out there, people can't be penalized for that. So there has to be the action behind that.
Yes, yeah. So that alignment, right? The alignment between what I say and is the evidence that I can even that is the evidence that I can trust that we are an organization where we can speak freely, where we can speak up, where we can disagree. That is missing in a lot of organizations, or at least even in corners of organizations, because it sounds good, but from a leadership standpoint, it requires a leader who's, I think we could honestly say is a little bit further down the road in terms of their own personal self-awareness, their growth around that, because most organizational leaders over the last few generations have been taught that leadership is convince, coerce, and control. And that's how you show strength, and that's how you show leadership. And yet, there's more and more that's coming out that is saying, that doesn't work and probably never worked, or at least never worked well, versus how do we really empower people to be people and to feel safe and trust and be able to share. So yeah, powerful stuff.
Hey, Keith.
Yeah.
Have you ever asked those questions, let's say in a small group, about trust, safety, inclusion, trying to get some feedback, and you just get crickets?
Yeah, oh my God, all the time, because Emily, no one's ever been asked this stuff. At least that's my experience. You do get crickets, and in response to crickets, sometimes in response to crickets, I'll just recognize the crickets. Wow, I'm wondering if anybody's ever been asked these questions before, right? Or, you know what, it is really hard to operationalize or concretize, if that's a word, these concepts. So, that's where, for me, I just repeat some of those questions. I know this is really hard, group, but the questions I gave you are how I word it, so it's kind of how it makes sense to me. If trust, if trust and safety were enough, we're in this room, and it would allow you to be truly you, truly honest, what would the evidence be? I think that's the question that I probably harp on the most. What would the evidence be? What would you see, feel, hear? And you might have to ask it a few times. And the first time, especially if it's some kind of group where you're going to be meeting kind of ongoing, your first shot at this, it might produce some limited feedback. But part of the impact of a trust and safety agreement, especially if it's any kind of group that meets ongoing, is that agreement is up on the wall at every meeting. And you check in with it at the beginning of every meeting. And do we add to it? Do we modify it? Things like that. But yes, get ready. Get ready for people to look at you like you're nuts.
Keith, another difficult thing that I've come across is how to develop a relationship with a client on top of trying to get them through all the paperwork. Like, I've not at Catholic Charities, but at my other job, where I've focused too much on the paperwork and then realized afterwards that I didn't even develop a trust or a connection with the person.
Right.
And it just didn't sit right.
Yeah. Look, I can say this because I can say this. I am thrilled that I do not any longer work in any kind of agency or organizational setting in the human service field, because the stresses and strains and the pulls and pushes that you all have to deal with, and especially around, Brian, what you just said, I sure don't have the answer, because I know the paperwork has to be done. Right? That's how people get paid. That's how organizations stay open. That's how you track what's going on. The fact that you're even asking yourself that question thrills me. Right? To even just be thoughtful to yourself. All right, this is one of the challenges I have in figuring out how to balance this. So now, I might argue, you sit down with that person for the first time. I don't know how much time you have, and I don't know how much paperwork you have to get done. But if you can just even spend the first 10 to 15 minutes just connecting. That's more than a lot of other people do. And I don't say that judgmentally. I get it. That administrative component of what you all have to do is, 40 years ago when I was working in treatment, I remember what it was like then, and it's overwhelming. But are there places? Or, the other thing I guess I think about, Brian, is how do you make something transparent? So, even voicing what you just voiced to the client is a conversational pattern that increases trust and safety. Hey, client, I'm really, right now I'm really struggling with this. I would love to spend more time, you and I just connecting. There's some realities of some paperwork I have to get done. Can we maybe spend a little time digging into that, and then we're going to get back to you and I. So even throwing out onto the table, shining a light on what's there can be I find that very helpful. Does that make sense? Beyond that, I don't have any really good answer, because it's just a part of agency life.
I think also being able to look at how you do work and flipping things around. As I've been doing more and more training with the new staff I'm bringing on, I'm very task focused.
Yeah.
So I've always gone in and go, paper, let's connect. And I think part of what we've started doing is having that conversation, connecting up front. A lot of the information as you're connecting can actually be used to put into some of our intake paperwork. And the more familiar, I know, Brian, you're pretty new still, the more familiar you get with the intake paperwork, you don't have to have it in front of you, so it's not in the way. So you can actually be, if you're aware of what you need to ask on the paperwork, you could be doing that as part of your conversation, so that you don't have to have the actual piece of paper in front of you as like that barrier. They don't even know you're doing the intake paperwork.
Right.
And that comes with time and practice and familiarity with the intake paperwork and process.
Right. Yeah, no question, right? As you become more accustomed and familiar with what you have to do. The last thought I have on this, and this just comes from a pretty standard strategy in the coaching world, is to just ask permission, right? So if you have to do some paperwork, you ask people's permission. Can I have your permission to jot some things down? Now, sometimes people say, well, what if they say no? Well, if they say no, then you have to abide by their no and figure it out later. But what you're going to find is 99.9% of the time, they won't say no, but it's another way we communicate respect to people when we are not fully connected to them, and we maybe have to look down and jot down some notes. So even doing that and asking permission can be very,
especially if they see what you're writing.
Yeah, right.
The secretive is where they get nervous.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Now I want to be respectful of people's time.
Yes,
I know we
very
said
much
till
so.
10:30. Keith, I so appreciate this. I know for anybody that's on the call, Keith referenced several times him and Lori Drescher is the other one. I know I get regular information about their trainings.
Yep.
I've been through several of them. Several of my staff have. I will be sure to make sure I pass that out to everybody in case individuals want to do additional trainings.
Awesome.
Both Keith and Lori are fabulous in their training, and you'll definitely keep learning a lot. But I hope everybody got a lot out of today. Don't let the conversation stop here. Bring it back to other members of your team and to your leaders. I've already sent an email to my team saying, let us know how to incorporate this in our department. We've got to keep having this conversation. So
awesome. Sounds good. Everybody, thank you so much for making the time to sit in this morning. And people have my contact information. If you have questions or want to talk about any aspect of this, I think you see I love talking about it. So do not hesitate to give me a call.
Thanks, Keith.
All right, great. Everybody have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Friday.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Keith.
All right, bye-bye, guys.